much as I would love to hang out in the Linda Ronstadt Park listening to great music all day, we're going to head into the neighborhood portion of our Hollywood Heights tour, and really it's one of the most unique and fascinating neighborhoods in all of LA. Just like the Hollywood Bowl, it's a little over 100 years old. In fact, a lot of the houses in this neighborhood are going to be celebrating their 100th birthdays this decade. It has been home to showbiz people, politicians, rock stars, crime scenes, filming locations, and regular everyday people as well. So let's go jump into all of that right now. Right next to the bungalow village is a tiny street. Well, it's not even a street, it's a way, Woodland Way, and it is, I've seen longer hallways than this. It's super short with really charming homes, and it's a bit of a mystery, which I guess is appropriate because this next story is a bit of one. According to a few LA newspapers on May 5th, 1928, I feel like we're a little too close. Let me pull back. All right. A man by the name of Maurice Tournaire Jr. was arrested at 2122 for disturbing the peace and getting crazy drunk at a party he was hosting. He apparently had a problem with alcohol, and he ripped the gas line right out of the wall and started screaming at everyone. But the only problem is I can't find a 2122. It only goes as high as 2118. So what I think happened was, these aren't like this isn't just one house. It's divided into apartments. And I think back in the 20s, there may have even been more divisions because the articles refer to his home as his apartment. That's my guess anyway. I'm not entirely sure. I still want to tell you about Maurice because he spent 10 days in jail for his silly little outburst. Then he went on to go by the name Jacques Tournaire, maybe to distance himself from his film director father, Maurice Sr. Maurice, he was so prolific, he has a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, one of those names that you walk by and go, who? But he and his son Jacques, they were from France. Dad made movies there and in Hollywood, while Jacques worked as his sometime assistant. He also tried to act, and I believe he was living here at the time that he ushered at the Hollywood Bowl. He eventually went to France, but he returned here in 1934, where he would have his own career as a film director for over 30 years. His name changed, but his alcoholism did not, and it apparently affected his work, but he really did make some absolutely brilliant and beautiful films. He's honestly integral to the horror genre. He had been directing a lot of short films, but everything shifted in 1942 when he directed Cat People. Not only a cult classic, but even at the time, it was a box office smash. Well, he went on to have a pretty successful career. He even directed Gregory Peck and Robert Mitchum at one point. He directed Lucille Ball in 1949's Easy Living, and his very last movie in 1965 starred Vincent Price and Tab Hunter. And I think from an old map that I saw that you used to be able to go back there and turn right and take a path down into the bungalow village, but they closed it off a long time ago. Also, I'm using the pullback feature on the iPhone. Not sure if you can see how small and intimate it is back here, but it's kind of awkward getting so close to people's open windows and doors while I'm talking. So I'm just gonna... Sometimes I feel like I should be whispering. Our very first house on Camrose Drive was quite a happy house back in June of 1937 when Mrs. Mary Black was living here. See, way back in 1913, Mrs. Black lost her wedding ring while she was gardening at her home in Grand Ridge, Illinois. Ironically, 3 days later, her poor husband passed away. Now a widow, she moved out here to this house, and 24 years after she lost that wedding ring, she went back to Grand Ridge for a family reunion, and her 13-year-old grandson was playing in the backyard, and yep, he found her wedding ring. It had 24 years worth of dirt on it, but she had it cleaned when she returned to her home here and called the press because she wanted the world to know that she would never again take that wedding ring off. Mrs. Black's next-door neighbor may have very well heard the wedding ring story firsthand because she moved right next door into this house in the mid-1930s. She was Icelandic, and her name was Nina Saemundsson. Nina, she was an artist, a sculptor. Next time you find yourself in front of the Waldorf Astoria in New York City, and I mean, who doesn't find themselves in front of the Waldorf? Look up, though, and check out its original sculpture. It's called The Spirit of Achievement, and it has sat perched above the main entrance since its grand opening back in 1931. Over 400 applicants submitted their work to be chosen by the Waldorf, but the winning choice was Nina's. She also sculpted a bust of movie star Hedy Lamarr while Hedy was on break during filming of Lady of the Tropics. And Hades was not the only head that she carved. Nina also did a bust of Leif Erikson, and it sits at the Ferndale Drive entrance to Griffith Park, which is over off of Los Feliz Boulevard. And Nina also did an 8-foot sculpture called Prometheus Bringing Fire to Earth, and that has been sitting in LA's MacArthur Park since 1935. And leave it to an artist to be brave and edgy. Nina lived here with her partner, Polly James, a screenwriter. And they lived here for a while, all of the 40s and half of the 50s. Polly wrote a Greer Garson movie. It was called Mrs. Parkington, as well as a bunch of television episodes, mostly all westerns. There just isn't a lot out there about Polly. She lived a very private, low-key life until she passed away. I mean, probably because, the time period, and they were most likely closeted. Nina, she left this house and America in 1955 and died 10 years later at the age of 72 in her native Iceland, but hopefully her work will remain on both of America's coasts for quite some time. Wonder if Mrs. Marian Corcoran's name ever came up at one of Mrs. Black's or Nina and Polly's dinner parties. She was old news by the time any of them had moved in, but I'm sure for a while the entire neighborhood was talking about her back in 1926. She was 24 years old, and she was found dead in her bedroom closet inside this house, strangled by a kitchen apron cord on November 11th of 1926. According to her husband, David Corcoran, he came home from work to find the front door wide open and his wife on the closet floor. Police, they didn't see any signs of any sort of struggle other than the marks around her neck. And this is one of those times where you kind of go, because according to property records, this house that we're looking at was built in 1923, but all of the news stories on this case refer to the Corcoran home as a side-by-side duplex bungalow situation, so it's pretty clear there has been an extensive remodeling. However, back in 1926, a screenwriter named Rosalie Muhall, she was the wife of a film director named George Crone. They were living together in the bungalow next door to the Corcorans, and Rosalie said you could hear everything between the paper-thin walls, and all she heard that day was Marian singing and talking to someone on the telephone all afternoon. And this building was actually for sale, so police thought at first that perhaps Marian let the killer in willingly as a potential buyer. Yeah, no. After an autopsy and an investigation, police suddenly ruled that her death was a suicide. But there was no chair or any indication that she had been hanging anywhere, but that's what the police ruled. Also, the worst and weirdest part about this whole story that did make front page news for a couple of weeks is that the press just casually mentions that, yeah, you know what, maybe she could have been depressed enough to kill herself because she was sad about the recent consecutive deaths of her 3 children. And that's all they said. They never said how, just that one after the other, she lost all 3 of her kids. Where was that investigation? But police, they were adamant. It was a suicide, and that was that. I probably should have mentioned earlier that in addition to the variety of people who lived here, there's a variety of stories. It's quite a roller coaster. Happy stories, mysterious stories, dark stories, sad stories. If Mrs. Corcoran and her 3 kids weren't sad enough, almost 2 decades later, I found a notice that a young man by the name of John W. Graham had arrived in Texas for Army training in June of 1944. His proud parents lived right here. He must have been 18, 19. Well, found his name again just slightly over 1 year later, this time announcing that the poor kid was a casualty of war. So sad. We're just working our way up Camrose Drive. We have our 2nd street, Rockledge Road, a little longer than Woodland Way, and up over the other side of this hillside is the Hollywood Bowl parking lot to give you a better idea where we are. Rockledge Road sounds fake, like a charming road name from a movie. It also says it's a dead end, but is it? Speaking of charming, how about Mrs. Charles Fenton? She lived in this beautiful home built in 1923, and in 1927 she took to her version of social media back in the day, the social section of the newspaper, and announced to everyone that she graciously hosted a bridge and tea party at this house. I've said this in other videos, but social media behavior is not new. The format is, take Mrs. Charles Fenton and her big party, for instance. She wanted everyone to know that she decorated in yellow and orange, that she used chintz table covers with a basket pattern. Oh, she would have just loved Instagram and hashtags. Hashtag pattern covering, hashtag yellow candles. I bet she was lovely, though, and threw wonderful parties. Hashtag Mrs. Charles Fenton. Get it going. I would never suggest that Mrs. Fenton was a gossiper, but Her event did take place 9 months after Marian Corcoran's death, so someone in her friend circle was standing off in a corner sharing their opinion on what really happened. I just want to show you this house up on the right, even though I'm not going to tell you what happened here until we get up behind it. Oh, you can hear the wind chimes. Love that. Anyway, it's one of those stories that, it's an answer to a question I hear all the time when I'm showing friends and family around town. Someone always asks it. So if you've ever wondered it, you will have your answer to that question in a few minutes. But first, we're going to talk about the house next to it. Built in 1924, it's one of those beautiful houses that honestly looks a lot bigger than it is. I mean, it's big, but on a hill, it just seems so wow. But really, it's 1,900 square feet. I mean, and I know that's not small, but it's just, I don't know. If I got summoned into this house, I would expect Sunset Boulevard rooms. It just looks so massive. A year after this house was built, an actor named Morgan Woodward was born out in Fort Worth, Texas. By his 20s, he had broken into film and television, appearing in a bunch of westerns throughout the 50s and 60s, making enough of a living to eventually buy this house. He was on Gunsmoke, Bonanza. He also did an episode of The Lucy Show where he and John Wayne played cowboys. I like to say played cowboys, reminding people that John Wayne and actors like him were in fact actors. They lived in houses like this. They wore makeup, put on costumes, sat in trailers, and learned their lines. Morgan was fantastic at playing them. He was a brilliant actor. He also happened to be in two of my favorite movies, two movies that could not be more opposite from one another. 1967's Cool Hand Luke, he played Boss Godfrey. Then in 1985, he played Natalie's dad in Girls Just Want to Have Fun with Helen Hunt and Sarah Jessica Parker. And Shannon Doherty. I cannot believe she is the late Shannon Doherty. So sad. Morgan, though, he worked forever. He did 55 episodes playing Punk Anderson on Dallas and continued to work throughout the 90s, ending his career with an appearance on The X-Files in 97. He actually passed away here in his home at the age of 93 on February 22nd, 2019, not that long ago. You know what's crazy? 2019 actually kind of was a long time ago. I mean, half a decade. That's not nothing. It's probably why I think it's even more special that this little library that was put up in Mr. Woodward's memory is still standing. And I have to tell you, these little libraries, I think they started going up, 15 years ago? Oh, I think they're the greatest additions to neighborhoods. I love them so much. There's a couple of them over where I live, and every time I go by, there are different books. Such a fan of books and reading, so yay little libraries, and yay Morgan Woodward, and yay for orgies. Wait, what? Yes, orgies. Seemed to be very popular in the 20s and 30s, and Lillian Winters, she enjoyed them. She got arrested here at her home in April of 1925. This house, it was only a year old, but she was 27, and she was arrested here because she had been thrown out of the Ambassador Hotel down on Wilshire Boulevard after a guest complained that Lillian had stolen a ring from his dresser. The man pressed charges, so detectives, they found her address off of one of her luggage tags. Apparently, Lillian was so distraught in jail over this whole arrest that she sliced her wrist with a broken piece of mirror. Don't worry, though, she survived and rebounded enough to once again get arrested the following year in 1926, this time for drinking in a 4-man, 3-woman orgy. And get this, one of the men was the guy who accused her of stealing his ring at the Ambassador Hotel. Shady, shady, Lillian Winters. Hashtag orgy. And while Lillian was out robbing people and orgying it up, Mrs. Catherine Yates Rush, a widow, was living over here, and like her neighbor down the street, she too loved to host parties and tell the world about it. I'm telling you, these people would have loved Facebook. Mrs. Rush had 40 people over to celebrate her 92nd birthday in 1925. In her home, it had quite a nice view of the newly finished Highland Camrose bungalow village. And this party, it was in October, so she had fall blossoms and pastel shades, and of course, a massive cake with 92 candles on it. Many telegrams and letters were sent for her, and she also announced that Mrs. Helen Mayer and Mrs. Howard Salisbury would be presiding over the punch bowl. Yeah, they made the announcement. She totally would have tagged them on Facebook. 2 people on the punch bowl, though, stresses me out. Why 2? Why anyone? Just ladle your own punch and move along, no? Well, the following year, in 1926, she threw a 93rd birthday party, this time telling everyone about the many flowers that were sent to her by her many friends, transforming her home into a garden. She asked that everyone arrive at 3, but to make sure they were gone by 6, and Mrs. Helen Mayer was put back on serving drinks, but this time the punch was out and coffee was in, but Mrs. Salisbury was out, replaced by Mrs. Stella Akir. Drama. No word, however, on her remaining birthdays, but flowers were sadly once again sent here in 1929, this time because poor Mrs. Rush passed away at the age of 96, right here in her home. Gotta keep moving, but one quick fun fact about these houses. When they were a mere 74 years old, back in 1998, one of them served as Meg Ryan's house in City of Angels, that movie with Nicolas Cage. You only see the outside for a few seconds when either Meg or, most likely, her body double run up the set of stairs to the right. Hers was the house above the garages. There's probably not a house in this neighborhood that I wouldn't live in, but this one is definitely up there as one of my favorites. It last sold in 2021 for $2.6 million. It has 4 bedrooms and 3,600 square feet and just views for days. It's perched up so high, so perfectly, probably because it was built for our dear friend Hugo Hirchofer and his family, the man who named the Hollywood Bowl. They built it in 1925 when the bowl was just 3 years old. And as huge as it is to be able to say, you named the Hollywood Bowl, Hugo was already kind of known around town. He came to LA from Michigan, where he was educated in music and singing in 1908 to head up the music department at Hollywood High School when he was just 27. He stayed with the school until the bowl opened, and then he shifted his career focus over there. He was very active in community singing groups and even offered lessons right out of his home here. He had a daughter named Margaret, and she would walk to and from here to be an usher at the Hollywood Bowl. She also went on to be the main driving force behind the San Diego Opera, which opened back in 1965. She passed away at the age of 90 in 2004, and her dad, he died in 1955 at the age of 73. And right next door, but set even further up the hill, is a house built in 1922, 4 bedrooms and 4,000 square feet still standing. This house, it's seen quite a lot of LA history. It was home to LA's 25th mayor, Fletcher Bowron, who was actually living here at the time of his, reign? In fact, he and his family were photographed for the 1950 census right here in their home. And he was mayor for quite some time, the entire 40s. He started in the fall of 1938, and he remained mayor until the summer of 1953. 15 years, making him the second longest running mayor behind Tom Bradley. He even landed himself on the cover of Time magazine. Pretty big for a mayor. Even longer, though, was his marriage to his wife Irene, almost 40 years, from 1922 up until her death in 1961. Months after she passed, however, Fletcher married his longtime assistant. Not sure exactly why they moved out of this house, but Fletcher Bowron died in 1961. He was 81, and he suffered a heart attack behind the wheel of his car, causing him to crash into his carport at his home in Park La Brea, an apartment complex that I feature a lot of in my Miracle Mile story location tour. Also, Fletcher had a couple run-ins with pop culture that are worth mentioning. He appeared with Judy Garland during Proclamation of Music Week in 1952, the same year that he did a sketch with Jack Benny and Eve Arden for the George Burns and Gracie Allen show.
Yeah. Now look, Eve. Hey, here comes the mayor of Los Angeles.
Good to
Mayor
see you.
Bowron, well, it's certainly good to see you. Yeah. Now, Mayor, did you get my letter asking you to speak at the dedication program?
Yes, I'm on my way down to the studio now, but my car stalled back here about 3 blocks, and I'm going down to a gas station.
Oh, did you run out of gas?
Yes, you see, the city buys it for me a quart at a time.
Well, all of us at CBS are delighted you could be there, Mayor Bowron. Have you seen Television City yet?
Yes, from the very beginning, and it's fabulous. You know, the growth of this very spot of ground represents the growth and development of the city of Los Angeles. And you know, Jack, right under the studio is an oil field. They developed oil there, and then it was the site of motion picture production, and now Television City. It's a wonderful thing, and I take pride, as I'm sure every good American does, in this achievement. And I'm so happy that Los Angeles is the real center, a creative center for these United States.
Under this building, there's oil.
All right, so directly across the street here is the very, very top of the house with the one with the wind chimes. And the question that I get is, do cars ever drive off of these windy, hilly roads into people's homes? And yes, they have. I haven't heard of it happening too often, but poor LJ Washburn, the 63-year-old, he had gone on and on and on for 25 years about this fear of a car landing on his roof until, guess what? It happened. Luckily, nobody was hurt, but, I mean, it's straight out of an Alanis song. A little too ironic. Oh, I hear the wind chimes again. Anyway, LJ, he had so much anxiety living here, and he had pleaded with the city of LA to put up a fence, and after the car crashed onto his roof, they finally listened. Not only that, but they painted the curb red, and ever since then, nobody has been allowed to park right here. I also love that in the article I found about this, you can see the same, I don't know what they are, roof vents? Steeples? Whatever those little things are by the air conditioner. Also, why did he live in this house if it was such a huge fear of his? And this is what I meant by it not really being a dead end. For cars maybe, but just next to the very last house on Rockledge is kind of a hidden little walkway. It's technically a public street, Altos Place. And these aren't the back entrances to these houses. This is it. This is how you get here. Probably a real blast for delivery people and movers, but what a beautiful, quiet spot. The first house on the right, it was built in 1925, and in 1932, the LA Times wanted you to know that their classified section was worth using because Mrs. Ted Stetson, she placed an ad wanting to rent this house out, and she got a whopping 14 inquiries, and that she actually rented it to someone. I doubt her renter was Joe Zadana, but that is who was living here 6 years later, in 1938, when he was arrested for being a stowaway on a cruise ship called the Mariposa, heading for Honolulu, where he planned to start a new life. Wonder what he was leaving here. But it's this house across from it whose walls I would kill to talk to. It has seen and heard a lot since it was built in 1929. A 3-bedroom, 1,900 square foot gem. Richard Wayne, sometimes called Dickie, he was an actor who appeared in dozens of silent films. He was living here in 1932 when he sued his ex-wife for $300,000. He claimed that her love of traveling prevented him from starring opposite Gloria Swanson and a bunch of other stars, which would have given him a bigger career. Relax, Dickie. It's all about another resident of 6856 anyway, and she lived here in the mid-1950s. But prior to that, she was born Myrtle Louise Stonesifer in Littlestown, Pennsylvania. On May 1st, 1905, she went on to get a master's in drama at the University of Pennsylvania and then made her way to New York, where she attended the American Academy of Dramatic Arts and performed off-Broadway. While in New York, she was going by her middle name Louise and was using the last name Howard. And she wrote a lot, scripts, plays. She even put on a show that she wrote called Women's Hotel in 1935. A scout from 20th Century Fox attended one of her shows and afterwards said he was interested in turning it into a film. Could he see the script? So she gave it to him and never heard anything. Well, her jaw absolutely dropped to the floor when she went to see Linda Darnell on screen in 1939's Hotel for Women, and there it was. Her story, her script. I mean, they didn't even try to disguise the title, and she sued them. She actually won a lawsuit against Fox in 1941, receiving a hefty 20% of the profits. However, it wasn't a huge hit, and it got her $5,000. But her life changed drastically in 1940 when she married Jaron Criswell King and moved to Hollywood, where she was now going by the name Halo Meadows. And they were quite the duo. Her husband, now going by the amazing Criswell, a very popular psychic. They wrote books together and appeared together, but it was apparently more of a professional marriage. I'm not even sure that they lived together. She was a very proud, independent woman type. He made several TV appearances and became famous for his predictions that famously never came true, except for one. He told Jack Paar in March of 1963 that JFK would not be reelected in November. Ugh, he was right. But he appeared a few times on Jack Paar, but it was director Ed Wood who really latched on to Criswell. He even appeared in a few of Ed's films. He and Halo, they hung out with Ed's wild group of eccentric friends, and he was important enough in Ed's life to be portrayed by Jeffrey Jones in Tim Burton's Ed Wood. But Halo Meadows, she was way too busy making her own art. Extremely artsy and eccentric, a bit bizarre, dark, perhaps morbid. In 1956, while living right here, she appeared on the popular hit show You Bet Your Life, hosted by Groucho Marx. She performed her own composition, a song called Chop My Head Off.
Halo Meadows, why did your parents ever pick out such an offbeat name like Halo?
Oh, they didn't pick it. I had an ordinary name, so I chose it.
Oh. Well, what was this ordinary name that you had?
Myrtle Louise.
That's a nice name. Now, where are you from, Myrtle?
Littlestown, Pennsylvania.
A little town in Pennsylvania? Well, what's the name of it?
Littlestown.
Where's
But
Littleton?
it's Littles, Littles. They're very particular about the S.
Well, I should think so. You know, Halo Meadows sounds like a pen name. Have you ever been in the pen, Halo? No. I mean, when you chose Halo Meadows for a name, did you have a professional career in mind?
Yes, I was writing.
You were writing? Oh.
Writing
What were you
plays.
writing? Plays?
Well, but not so much. I'm more interested in songs. Writing songs.
You're writing, you're a composer now.
Yes.
Well, what are some of your songs? Maybe I've heard them.
Well, I had Victorian Waltz. I was just
Never
around
heard
the
them.
corner.
You were where?
I was just around the corner.
Oh. Well, could you sing just around the corner?
Well, no, but what I'm most interested in is a series that I call a gloom series and a super love. But I'll do one from the gloom.
Could you sing after you're gone?
Chop my head off. Chop my head off.
Well, now, wait a minute.
head off.
Sing, all right, sing a little of it. I'd rather you sing around the corner, huh?
Chop my head off. Kick it around. Hang it up. Lay it down. Look at it, dear. Really take a good look. It's me. It's me. It's me. Oh, chop my head off. Make a nice clean chop. Chop my head off, dear. Chop it off.
Nice, I like that. Well, what kind of music do you use for that? Do you have somebody play on a guillotine?
Oh, I have.
That's a very unusual song.
She seemed to get a lot of press and attention, mostly for her plays and performances that would play at various theaters and clubs around town. She was a hodgepodge of acting, singing, speaking, and she even ran for president, all from this house. In fact, there are several articles about it, even listing her home address here. She would hold meetings on Tuesdays and had what I guess she called thought groups. I think they called themselves Thought Extension. Doesn't sound as much culty as it does New Age and hippie, way before that became a thing. Maybe a little ahead of her time, because honestly, some of what she told the press isn't all that bad. She would discuss foreign and domestic policies and stressed the importance of the modern woman, but then would add things like, life is difficult when you take yourself too seriously. I mean, where's the lie, you know? Not only that, but she ran on a 3-point platform. 1, respect for dogs. 2, freedom of women. And 3, keeping men young and good-natured. I mean, what's not to love? Well, no one took her run seriously. She was like a less famous Roseanne back when she ran. But Halo continued writing and performing, even bringing metaphysics into theater. She would collaborate with astrologers and numerologists. She also had a dog named Perfect. Perfect was so popular, he was even the subject of a book. Halo eventually moved to a house on Selma Avenue in Hollywood and carried on. Hollywood Hotel Theater, the Hollywood Inn, the Hollywood Playhouse, they all gave her a platform to express her art until 1969, when she sold her house to Mickey Hargitay, father to 5-year-old Mariska, and said goodbye to Hollywood. She moved back to Littlestown, where she spent the rest of her life in her parents' house, the house she grew up in. Her divorce from the amazing Criswell was finalized in 1974. He died at the age of 75 on October 4th, 1982. In Littlestown, Halo was the 80-year-old woman who used to live in Hollywood. People would always whisper about her and point. She kept to herself and eventually passed away on May 12th, 1985. But Halo once said she wanted everyone to look at themselves kind of like a store, saying that no store ever wants to lose a customer, and that each person should keep their windows well dressed with frequent changes. Kind of love that. Halo Meadows is one of those people who, when reading about her, I'm like, oh, she's fascinating and wild and fun, but I'd probably spend a minute with her and be like, bye, crazy lady. Speaking of crazy, all the meetings and lectures and just all the events that she had here, all those people had to find a place to park, then find this little path. Surprised more people didn't crash into Mr. Washburn's roof just out of frustration. Not easy addresses to find, which I'm sure is the point, but what an adventure. And what's an adventure without an old tower? Rockledge Road can now be checked off our list. We're going to continue back up Camrose for a minute. There are only 2 houses until our next street. This Spanish Revival one, built in 1923. Love how it's angled, how it just sits into the corner. And a man lived here who will be someone in an upcoming story location tour that I want to do. The life and very mysterious death of Thelma Todd, an actress who was found dead in her convertible, parked in the garage by a restaurant that she owned on the Pacific Coast Highway. Harvey Priester, he was an insurance broker, rumored to have been engaged to her at one point. Harvey was the first witness to testify at the inquest into Thelma's death. He had seen her the last Saturday that she was alive at the Trocadero nightclub. He was living here at the time and even stated this address to the jurors at the inquest. Her death, it was a huge, huge story, front page stuff. I was going to tell you more about it, but now I really want to go make a story location tour on it, so I'll save it. And we'll go right into the second house right next to it. It was built in 1922. It was renovated very extensively in 1970 and clearly has a new fence. But back in 1941, it was home to Betty Healy, widow of Ted Healy, a comedian from vaudeville and screen. His biggest claim to fame was pretty huge. He created the Three Stooges and that brand of slapstick that came with them. He was childhood friends with them, and many of the big-name comedians you know have cited Ted as an influence on their work. He made a ton of movies and had a really fascinating career, but I'm not going to talk too much about him because he never lived here, but Betty did. He was actually married to 2 Bettys, one from 1922 to 1932, and then his widow, Betty, who he married in 1936. She was just a 21-year-old student from UCLA. He supposedly proposed, and they married the following day. Not surprisingly, Betty filed for divorce almost immediately, but then the two reconciled and even had a son together on December 17th, 1937. 4 days later, Ted went out celebrating the arrival of his new son with friends at the, guess where, the Trocadero nightclub on Sunset. It's now long gone, and so is probably any hope of making sense of what happened next. Some say that Ted was beaten up that night by some college guys. Others said it was actors Wallace Beery and producer Albert Broccoli. Wallace was a huge movie star, once married to Gloria Swanson, and Broccoli went on to produce most of the James Bond movies down the road. The Wallace Beery angle is rumored, but Broccoli did admit to getting into a fight with Ted, but he said they parted ways on good terms. Well, Ted was driven back to his home in Beverly Hills where he died at 3 a.m. Official cause was chronic alcoholism. There are a lot more details to the story that make it worthy of its own tour, really. Poor Betty, though, she could barely function and remained hospitalized herself for mental reasons. I mean, the poor woman had just given birth. Had to be terrible. Anyway, Hollywood pals of Ted's rallied around her. They held fundraisers and created a trust so that she and her son could live decently. That's when this place came into the picture. She was living here in the summer of 1941 when she was arrested and jailed for drunk driving. She eventually remarried and found work with the Union Pacific Railroad and died in 1986 at the age of 72. By constantly bringing it up, so I'll just say one more time that people back in the day would have just loved social media. Human behavior just has not changed the way that technology has. Case in point with Mr. and Mrs. James Dietrich, who lived right here in 1930. They had people over for tea and music, and they took to the paper to let everyone know just how many friends they could cram into their house here, built in 1924. They weren't the only ones who did it. Everyone did it. Their neighbors, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, they announced that their friends, Mr. and Mrs. Peters, were coming in for the weekend from San Bernardino. In fact, there are a handful of newspaper announcements from the 1930s with the Smiths announcing every time they had guests come to town. It's just so funny to me. Could you imagine having to call the newspaper to tell them every time you had someone staying at your place? I mean, I guess that's how they had to do it back then, but what was the goal? Would you read the paper and be like, oh, fun, the Smiths have friends in town. I'm going to invite myself and stop by to meet them. Or was it more like the Smiths telling people, hey, yeah, no, we have the Peters here this weekend. We're busy. Leave us alone. Also, I've been thinking about Mrs. Rush and how she assigned 2 of her friends to serve coffee at her parties, and I kind of like it. I'm into it now. I think I'm going to bring that back. I also really like the greenery, the vines growing on this house. I think it's absolutely beautiful, and it really caters to that Mediterranean vibe that is about to overtake the next part of this tour. There's our little hidden street where Halo Meadows lived. Because we're back now at the top of Hightower Drive, the street that is, there's still some more climbing to do. I know you didn't think I was going to just ignore this tower. It is it's one of the crown jewels of the entire neighborhood. You know those Starbucks mugs that feature the attractions from the cities in which they're sold? Well, if there was a Hollywood Heights mug, the Hightower would be front and center. Even though it's not, you really want it to be more mysterious and alluring than it really is. Because the truth is, it's just an elevator built for the residences of the homes up there. And these are their garages because it is completely roadless and completely carless up there. Carl K. He's the man responsible for the high tower and also for the first 4 homes that were built after it was constructed. The intent from the very start was to build around the tower to model this hillside after that Mediterranean lifestyle, particularly Italy. The way the houses there were connected by sidewalks and paths. He wanted an elevator to be the main access, so a permit to build it was granted in 1922, and up it went. It's 5 stories, stands tall at over 100 feet, with 20 tons of steel securely planted into the hillside. When it first went in, it could only be operated by a secret combination, but for several years now, it's only been operable by key, and that key is only available to the residents who live here. You know, though, I just can't help but want some sort of diabolical story to go along with it for some reason. I don't know, like an old 1920s murder happening in it, or someone disappearing after last being seen ascending into it. I don't know, something. But really, its only stories come from where else? Fiction in Hollywood, in film and television and books. Raymond Chandler described the residence of his brilliant character, Philip Marlowe, in his 1942 book, The High Window, as Marlowe living, quote, on the cliffs above Hightower Drive in a building with a fancy elevator. Philip Marlowe appeared in a handful of Raymond's books, and he was played on film by Humphrey Bogart in 1946's The Big Sleep opposite Lauren Bacall. But it was my favorite film director, Robert Altman, who turned Chandler's 1953 book, The Long Goodbye, into a 1973 film starring Elliot Gould as Mr. Marlowe. I'm not sure if Robert Altman and his production had the gates removed or if they're a newer addition to the elevator, but they prevent just anyone from walking through the corridor to the elevator. But I love that Robert Altman decided, hey, this time let's actually put Philip Marlowe into the place that Raymond Chandler described. The film used this area for a handful of scenes in the movie, and really, I mean, I mentioned the gates, but other than that, not too much has changed in the 50 years since that movie was filmed. The Long Goodbye is more of a satirical comedic thriller, but the film that used it 18 years later in 1991, Kenneth Branagh's Dead Again, starring him and his then-wife Emma Thompson, that's an actual dark, scarier thriller that I remember absolutely loving when I saw it years ago. He really gave the tower and the apartment building right next to it, the white one, where Emma Thompson lived, a much darker, ominous, creepier vibe. And if you want to see what this area looked like before either of those two movies, it can be seen in a 1961 episode of a television show called Naked City, which ran from 1958 to 1963. I told you that you need a key, that only residents have keys. However, that doesn't mean we can't still go up there. Mediterranean inspiration can't come without more hidden little walkways and pathways that are also public. And again, the houses we're about to pass, this little sidewalk, it's technically their address. Los Altos Place continuing on this side. And you really want there to be a story with this house, but there just isn't. Or at least none that I know. Maybe that makes the best story. It's pretty small, just over 900 square feet, and that is what I love about this neighborhood. Yeah, there are some mansions, but there are a lot of smaller options for living, and I love that. Shouldn't have to be a millionaire to enjoy living in the Hollywood Hills. There are a lot of apartments and multi-family houses in this neighborhood. Imagine being a kid and coming out here to visit, and this is where your family member lived, or even just growing up around here. All right, so Los Altos, it intersects with Broadview Terrace right here, another street that only offers pedestrian traffic. We'll see that part of Broadview a little later after we explore the upper level. The first house right here on the left just sold last year. It was built in 1942, a 1,500 square footer. And these steps, they'll definitely make you appreciate Carl K and his elevator, although I think they're what make it all so unique. Plus, when you get to the top, you get a better perspective on just how high we are. Now it's just time to enjoy the views. This is really one of those times where I feel like I have to whisper because we're so close to where people live. Actually, you know what? If you really want to enjoy the view, there is a great little spot just over this way. This little bench. Finish watching this tour, then come sit and look out at all the houses that you will have learned about. Yes, you are going to see all of those. All right, I lost my little wind guard on my microphone. I don't know where it went. It fell off somewhere. So I think it's pretty calm right now, but if it gets windy, I apologize. But the house on the left, it was built in 1936. It's a 2-bedroom, 1,200 square foot home, almost the same size as the house to the right of it. However, that one was built in 1954 and has obviously had renovations since. It also has a little claim to fame, as it once was the home of magician David Copperfield back in the 90s. Bet he was the last person you expected me to say. Although a magician living up here definitely tracks. He dated supermodel Claudia Schiffer, and I wonder if the two of them ever came out and cuddled on the little bench here. I also wonder where Tim Burton lived, because it has been reported that the director lived up here for quite some time, but he's been very tight-lipped on where exactly. It is, however, known that he befriended Copperfield's mother, who also lived up here. But if you are someone who knows Tim Burton, if you are Winona Ryder and you were ever invited to his house, let us know in the comments which one it was. I would love to know. Like I said, Carl K didn't just design the high tower. He was the architect behind a few of the homes surrounding the elevator. They all represent the streamlined, modern look, that clean, straight line, sleek look that has really come to exemplify California architecture, and this is a beautiful representation of it. It's pretty prominent in The Long Goodbye. However, you really only see the upper level of it in the film. And what's so cool about this building, it's a multi-family unit. This unit is, I'm pretty sure, only accessible from down here, but in order to get to the other one, you have to go up another flight of steps, which of course we're gonna do. Well, this is where it gets real fun. You'll be like, oh, now I see how the elevator tower works. Doesn't stop right here. There's that door there on the right. It's some sort of maintenance door. But from here, underneath all of the concrete, you can see the reinforcement and just how it's built into the hillside. I have no idea how it's built into the hillside. It just is. We trust it. I don't know. It's stayed up here for 100 years so far. It must have done something right. But really, to me, Kay's crown jewel, in my opinion, it's this building, another multi-family building. 2 of the units down here, and the others are, yep, up another flight of steps. It's all right, we got this. Oh, in fact, I forgot this was here. There's a little plaque honoring Carl Kay and his contribution to this beautiful neighborhood. But now we can see where the elevator brings you. Also, I don't want to disrespect anyone's privacy, but I will say it's kind of a bummer that this hedge has been put up. In The Long Goodbye, you can see how it had always been, that you can see out from right here, really getting a view of Carl Kay's streamlined gem. In fact, though, according to the movie, you could actually see right into where the people live, so I guess I can see why they would want to grow hedges, but it would be fun for us to see. I'm not going to go on and on about The Long Goodbye, I promise, but this area plays such a big role in the film, and every time you find an article or a blog about Hollywood Heights, there is going to be a mention that this was filmed here. And again, it is just such a great representation for everyone to see what this all looked like in 1973. And oh my gosh, what a time for cinema. Elliot Gould was such a movie star of the time. Recently divorced from Barbara Streisand. Robert Altman, he had done MASH and McCabe and Mrs. Miller. That was under his belt. And together, they made a film that I and so many people just love. John Williams even did the score. It's funny, it's not even in my top 5 favorite Altman films, and it's still one of his best.
Mr. Marlowe, you're the nicest neighbor we ever had.
Gotta be the nicest neighbor. I'm a private eye.
Meet Philip Marlowe. Elliot Gould is Philip Marlowe in Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye.
Robert Altman just uses his sets, his locations so magnificently, incorporating them as characters into his films that I honestly don't know how much I'd love this movie if his Philip Marlowe didn't live right here. You can see there's been adjustments to this place since The Long Goodbye and Dead Again filmed here. That fencing with the circular holes has been added, essentially cutting off the view from inside the apartment as well. Looked a lot cooler in those movies, but it's probably a lot better in terms of privacy. Also, we're looking at, I may have already said this, it's a fourplex, a total of 4 units upstairs and down. Said I wasn't gonna go on and on about The Long Goodbye, and then I did. I feel kind of bad I haven't talked more about Dead Again, but honestly, it's the vibe here for me is Elliot Gould. Dead Again is really great, but it's more, it uses this area as a backdrop, really. Can't remember it that well, but I know it's supposed to be very scary, and there's just absolutely nothing scary about this place to me. Nothing at all. Not even at night. I've been up here at night a few times, and it's just everything I love about it. Oh, did that just happen? Did you just see that? Did that open? All right, that was kind of scary. Maybe it's time to go.